Bram Stoker's Dracula is a 1992 American Gothic horror film produced and directed by Francis Ford Coppola and written by James V. Hart, based on the 1897 novel Dracula by Bram Stoker. The film stars Gary Oldman, Winona Ryder, Anthony Hopkins, and Keanu Reeves, with Richard E. Grant, Cary Elwes, Billy Campbell, Sadie Frost, and Tom Waits in supporting roles. Set in 19th century England and Romania. It follows the eponymous vampire, Oldman, who falls in love with Mina Murray, Ryder, the fiancée of his solicitor Jonathan Harker, Reeves. When Dracula begins terrorizing Mina's friends, Professor Abraham Van Helsing, Hopkins, an expert in vampirism, is summoned to bring an end to his reign of terror. Its closing credits theme love song for a vampire, was written and performed by Annie Lennox. At the end of September, after 4 decades, Francis Ford Coppola finally got to release his passion project Megalopolis in theaters. Despite its less than impressive box office performance and the responses to it being all over the place, it does give me an opportunity to revisit the subject of today's review, which just so happens to be the first movie to feature both Winona Ryder and Monica Bellucci, who recently redeemed for Beetlejuice. Based on Bram Stoker's eponymous 1897 novel, Dracula follows Jonathan Harker, an eager young British solicitor who is sent to Transylvania to handle the business affairs of the titular count, as R.M. Renfield, the man who was previously tasked with this job, has gone insane. Not long after his arrival, Harker discovers that his host is not what he seems and is promptly imprisoned by Dracula, who then proceeds to make his way to England with the intention of taking Harker's fiancée Mina Murray for himself, believing her to be the reincarnation of his previous wife Elisabetta, who tragically took her own life centuries ago, causing Dracula, who was a fierce Romanian warrior defending his homeland from the invading Ottoman Empire, to renounce his faith and pledge himself to the forces of darkness, thus becoming a vampire. Before we dive in, let's address the elephant in the room. As accomplished and respected as Coppola is as a filmmaker, having helmed some of the most celebrated and acclaimed movies of all time, he has also done some decidedly less than respectable, downright despicable things, and the reports of his inappropriate behavior on the set of Megalopolis certainly don't help his case. It saddens me to know that this will end up casting a shadow over his legacy and the way he will be remembered, as a filmmaker of his caliber really should know better than to pull this kind of shit, but in the end, everyone reaps what they sow. Putting aside Coppola's failings as a person, how does his take on the story of the most iconic vampire in all of fiction hold up? Well, despite one pretty glaring issue that I will address in a bit, overall this is another one of those movies that get better with repeat viewings for me, as I didn't fully appreciate it when I first watched it 10 or so years ago. Coppola and writer James V. Hart do a great job expanding on previous Dracula adaptations while simultaneously honoring what came before. Not only are certain moments given more room to breathe, not only do we get more insight into Dracula's lore, but the principal players in the story feel more fleshed out and developed. Heck, the way some of them are depicted here is pretty refreshing compared to what we are normally accustomed to. Which, of course, brings us to the cast. When it comes to Dracula cinematic portrayals, both Bela Lugosi and Christopher Lee set the standard and, needless to say, raised the bar pretty damn high, so it's a testament to Gary Oldman's talents that he was able to live up to that legacy while simultaneously adding his own flavor. Normally Dracula is depicted as pure evil, a ruthless monster and a schemer. Those elements are very much present in Oldman's portrayal, but there is also a hint of tragedy to him in this version, and I really gotta give props to Coppola and Hart for making it work so well while simultaneously never losing sight of the fact that good old Drac is still the villain. I mean, we're talking about the same guy who has no qualms about feeding a freaking infant to his brides. I really can't say enough good things about Oldman. He completely disappears into the role, and even with the over-the-top, borderline ridiculous look that he's sporting in his early scenes, he still commands a strong presence and manages to come across as quite ominous and unsettling. And lest we forget that iconic laugh of his that will haunt your nightmares. You also can't talk about Dracula without talking about his arch-nemesis and hands down my favorite character in the movie, Professor Abraham Van Helsing, played absolutely brilliantly by Anthony Hopkins. Like with Dracula, this version of Van Helsing also differs significantly from the serious, straight-faced, no-nonsense character he is usually depicted as. His attitude and core traits are retained, but he is also quite quirky and eccentric, and I just love the casual and nonchalant manner in which he says some really shocking stuff. It's just hilarious, and Hopkins nails it with the perfection you'd expect from him. And while I appreciate the solid amount of humor that this version of Van Helsing brings to the table, never once does he come across as a joke. He takes his job very seriously and he doesn't mince words about the gravity of the situation when talking to the other characters. No matter how ridiculous some aspects of said situation sound, he always tells it how it is. Plus, seeing Hopkins in a horror project where he's not playing a villain is a nice change of pace. Winona Ryder also provides a solid turn as Mina Murray. I like how they handled her arc, and the scenes she shares with both Oldman and Sadie Frost, the latter of whom plays Mina's best friend Lucy Westenra, are excellent. And between this movie, Beetlejuice, Edward Scissorhands, Alien, Resurrection, Black Swan, and Stranger Things, I think it's high time Ryder got recognized as a horror icon. Finally, we have the other elephant in the room, Keanu Reeves as Mina's fiancé Jonathan Harker. Now, before I say anything, let's be honest with ourselves here. Jonathan Harker has always been a pretty flat character, to the point that the only movie I've found him even remotely interesting in is Dracula, Dead and Loving It, and that's a spoof. That being said, as much as I love Keanu, I have to agree with the general consensus because he really is the weak link in this movie. Some American actors can pull off British accents and mannerisms quite well. Unfortunately, Keanu is not one of them, and the way he delivers certain lines is some of the funniest unintentional comedy you'll ever experience. Same goes with his expressions as he witnesses Dracula's brides feasting on the aforementioned infant. Maybe if Coppola had changed Harker's nationality to American, we already have an American supporting character. In this movie, one more wouldn't have hurt, and allowed Keanu to speak with his regular accent. We could have had something here, but as it stands, this is hands down one of the weakest performances of his career, and sadly it's nowhere near as consistently entertaining as the one in Johnny Mnemonic. Originally, Johnny Depp was set to play Harker, but ultimately dropped out, and I do wish he had been able to stick around because he sounded like a much better fit for the role, not to mention he can actually do a British accent, but I digress. Still, Keanu's casting is not a total loss. He and Ryder do look pretty adorable together. They had a great working relationship on set, and the filming of the movie led to a pretty fun anecdote that Ryder really enjoys telling in interviews, namely that for the scene which shows Jonathan and Mina's wedding, Coppola hired an actual priest, meaning that Ryder and Keanu are technically married in real life, and regardless of how legit that statement is, it's still pretty cute, and I can see why Ryder likes to talk about it. Rounding out the cast, we have Richard E. Grant as Dr. Jack Seward, who studied under Van Helsing and summons his old mentor to England as Lucy's transformation into a bloodsucker following her encounter with Dracula progresses. Cary Elwes as Lucy's fiancé Lord Arthur Holmwood, the Rocketeer himself, Billy Campbell, first name credited as Bill, as Lucy's other suitor Quincy P. Morris, who hails from Texas, Tom Waits as R.M. Renfield, and Florina Kendrick, Michaela Berku, and Monica Bellucci as Dracula's brides. Of course, Bellucci would go on to work with Keanu again in The Matrix Reloaded, and with much better results, seeing how the latter was appropriately cast that time around. Finally, we have the technical aspects, which are absolutely outstanding. At a time when CGI was really starting to gain traction, Coppola decided to firmly stick to old-school techniques, particularly in terms of effects and editing, with really impressive results. The level of artistry that is on display here alone makes the movie worth watching. Every shot is meticulously crafted, and a lot of them, especially the effects-heavy ones, are full of small details which serve as stellar examples of visual storytelling. Just on a side note, by the way, I don't know if it was intentional or not, but upon this latest rewatch I noticed that this movie is kinda Christmas-coded, with red, white, and green dominating the color palette, and the climax featuring quite a bit of snow, even if it's one hell of a coincidence. It still feels appropriate in the context of the ensuing battle between the forces of good and evil. Moving on, we have Michael Ballhaus' stunning cinematography. The way he and Coppola frame the shots gives the movie a strong and immersive atmosphere and a sense of scale, making everything feel grand and operatic, which is also reflected in the actors' performances, while simultaneously adding a dreamlike quality to certain scenes. The haunting visuals, top-notch set design, costumes, makeup, and creature designs, and the awesome score by Wojciech Killer top things off quite nicely. In conclusion, despite a casting choice that doesn't quite hit the mark and the fact that it's helmed by an artist with a rather spotty reputation, 1992's Dracula remains a bold and stylish take on the story of everybody's favorite blood-sucking aristocrat. If your thirst for vampire media is acting up, this is a pretty good way to quench it, so I say give it a shot. You may be pleasantly surprised. Lord knows there are much worse alternatives. Check it out. I'm going to give the film 8,5 out of 10. Let us know if the comments below, like, dislikes, subscribe. What's your opinion on this film? Or thanks for watching, see you later. Bye.